Hey everyone, welcome back to On Point. This episode I sit down with Brent from Valkyrie, and if you know anything about Valkyrie, it's higher end broadhead component and arrow system built all into one. And Brent comes with a lot of information, a lot of experience, and a lot of knowledge, and talks to us about how he arrived at his system that he uses today and that he sells with Valkyrie. I love having these conversations with different broadhead and arrow manufacturer companies, and Brent brings a lot to the table with this conversation. I really hope you guys enjoy it. Before we get started here, though, I want to announce that we're having a broadhead test, and I am so excited about this test here. I don't want to give too much away, but it's going to be a very in-depth and a lot of new testing, and we're going to take some of the testing from last year. But we need heads. We need 125 grain heads in the package, and if you want to submit a head, you can message me on Instagram just to make sure we don't have the heads that you're wanting to send me. But I've had quite a few guys reach out after my post on Instagram asking for 125 grain heads, and I appreciate everybody going out of their way to send us heads to help soften the blow of how many heads we're going to have to buy. We're shooting for 75, which was Wes's original goal, and we'll see where we end up at. But every pack of heads that we receive definitely does help, and make sure you message me before you send me one, and because I don't want to get any repeat offenders if we don't have to. That way you're not sending us something that we don't need. So message me on Instagram. I'll update you with what we still need. If you want to support that, you can go on to my Patreon. You can give us money there. You can message me for PayPal. We are accepting offers and donations, so this is going to be a very expensive, very extensive broadhead test, and anything helps. So outside of that, guys, let's go ahead and get into the episode with Brent, and I'll see you at the end of the episode. Bye.
Cool. Well, what do you say we get this thing going, Brent?
Okay.
So I've actually had a few requests quite a long time ago to get you on the show, and it's finally nice to be able to do it in person when we finally get to meet, and heard a lot of great things about your delivery system, your setup, and with what you have going on here. I just love you to kind of dive into it and go into, because you and I were talking earlier, you kind of you created this for yourself.
Yep.
And we're solving issues that you were trying to develop, and basically landed on this for your setup. And just basically walk me through it if you want, and then we'll kind of get into your system here.
Okay. For years, there's a lot of guys I get running them all the time now that like to tinker with their stuff and work on their setups, and it's the same kind of thing I've been doing for, ever since probably I started archery back when I was a kid. But trying things, always trying to find the ultimate setup and, become the most accurate setup that works the best for whatever bow you're shooting at that time. And I was always reading the magazines, buying everything, and trying it all for myself. And in the beginning, I'd just go with what I read and try it, and it'd either work or it wouldn't. Most 90% of the time it was not working. So I ended up with large garbage cans full of arrows and parts and stuff like that, and eventually read some Ashby stuff back in, it was like the early 90s, but on the reports he'd done in the 80s, and then thought it sounded pretty good with all the penetration stuff and bone breaching and accurate, all that stuff, but there was really no way to do it. It was before Grizzly Stick. And then, so I was always trying to put arrows inside it, and then carbon tubing came out. I mean, it was new and not very good. And, but then I was putting aluminum arrows and carbon arrows and trying to build some stronger setups and using parts. Anyway, over the years, so this has gone on for then pretty soon it's decades of every year there's new stuff coming out, and you're trying it, and it's good or it's not, and you keep improving your setup, or think you are. Then you read more stuff. Then so the first time I tried the weight forward thing, and based off of the Ashby stuff, was around 2004. I went ahead and built some arrows with 200, I forget, they're called Epsilon shafts. They were skinny carbons. I don't think they're around anymore. And somehow glued some outserts on them, and found some outserts somewhere and put on some 250 grain heads, but at that time no one really had any. So you had to buy these aluminum or these steel adapters and buy some glue-on broadheads and make 250 grain head. Anyway, I missed a big old bull, and I didn't change my arrow really at all. I was using weight tubes at the time, so I pulled the weight. I figured this out a long time ago, but I bought all these super stiff arrows with these heavy heads, and they wouldn't fly. And this is about the exact same around the time Grizzly Stick came around. Very soon, right in there, or right after, I can't remember. But so I ended up pulling the weight tubes out, putting the weight up front, and I didn't change my fletching or anything else in my arrow. So back then I was using 4 or 5 inch feathers. So anyway, because I read somewhere that you needed that stability right out of the bow, and then I was hunting over east. I actually drew a Wanaha tag in Oregon, which is like the premium tag in 2004, and so I was pretty confident in my setup, and I got a bull at 35 yards and shot, and I thought I got him, but didn't. My arrow went out there and nosed about 30 yards and did a nosedive and went under. I'm like, this weight forward thing is a bunch of BS. That's it. I'm done. And took all that stuff off, redid my whole thing. I went out, dropped my arrowhead back to normal standard stuff, put in regular inserts, got 125 grain heads, went out to Montana. I had a tag that year. And after the Wanaha hunt, where I got 0, and then went out and for any bull and ended up shooting a raghorn in Montana with a standard setup. And
really?
I'm like, okay, but I didn't get good penetration or anything, but I got one, and I'm like, my arrow didn't drop. I was happy.
Yeah.
And then so then I stuck with that for a while, ended up going with like full metal jackets and Montex for a long time, and pretty successful with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then. Anyway, then I started having some marginal stuff happen and some bad experiences, and I'm like, maybe I ought to relook at that weight forward thing. And I went back and I reread all the Ashby stuff, and I was like, yeah, okay. So then I went into full Ashby with the 650 grain arrows. I was using FMJs, but I was using like brass inserts and sleeves. We were actually cutting aluminum tubing like everybody's doing now, and to strengthen the front end, and started using that, but using heavy arrows, 650 plus, and lobbing logs. But it worked. It did exactly what Ashby said. I accidentally shot a cow elk through the ham, through the pelvic bone, went in, killed her, and a hog in the same year, almost identical. Quartering away, something happened. I ended up shooting him through the ham, got them both, and there's no way. My other regular setup, there's no way you just hit them in the ham, it'd stick in there, they'd run off, they're gone. Killed both of them. But after 2 years of that, what I call lobbing logs, got pretty it started sucking. Honestly, trajectory's terrible. If you're off by a yard, you're missing by 3 feet.
Yes.
That's ridiculous, and you can't. 3D shoots are no fun. The stuff works. You got to get closer. Reduced my effective range considerably. And so I went and I decided I need to figure out a system that was just as effective, but with a lighter weight arrow. And most guys running and I wasn't really thinking about marketing or business stuff or anything, or having my own archery business or anything like that. I was just thinking about, for me, I needed a moderate weight arrow that performs like a heavyweight. So I looked at all the factors of the ultimate arrow, and Ashby, there was a short essay or something he had on the ultimate arrow and how many factors are in it. We looked at all the factors. So I go, okay, we got to have all these factors: mechanical advantage of the broadhead, structural integrity, pure arrow flight, all that stuff. I said, but when he did the studies back in the 80s, he didn't have a lot of the technology and components we do now. He had we have skinnier, lighter, stiffer shafts, way better broadheads these days than we had back then. We had nothing. Grizzly Stick was the first company that I knew of that came along that actually made super ridiculously expensive broadheads at the time. But I was like, these are ridiculous. But I spent $1,000 on broadheads. I'm like, finally, somebody's making something we need. I don't have to buy, all this other stuff and try to manufacture something in my garage that what I want to do. Here it is. And which was a relief. I'm going off on these tangents, but
no, you're fine.
But then, but in order to get the moderate weight, though, I'm like, well, we need a lighter weight platform. And I revisited the weight forward thing, and I was going to build a broadhead because I was started getting frustrated with the broadhead design, and I was like, there has to be something a little bit better than what was out there, because I ended up started having some problems with the heads I was using, and I didn't want nothing, and I was ended up started using glue on single bevel 2 blades. But even with the single bevel 2 blade, the bone breach and all that stuff, and the penetration was great, but some of the blood trails was pretty marginal. I'm
Yes.
like, we're hitting these things pretty good, and
Yeah.
sometimes they die quick, sometimes they don't, and you're like, I wish I could get that penetration and bone breach with a 3 blade, because even though you have the S cut with the single bevel, you're still at times, you're thinking that thing's sealing up because, man, we should have more blood than this,
Mm-hmm.
And but I'm going to circle back to that blood thing in a second. So I ended up designing on paper a single bevel 2 blade that with some improvements to it to decrease its resistance to soft and heavy tissue. Because we're going to lighten the load. We're going to lighten that heavy bone breach threshold up. I wanted to get it down in somewhere like a full metal jacket with a 100 grain head on it. Somewhere, around 500 grains. And, but in order to do that, we had to start taking out all the resistance that Ashby was dealing with the single bevel 2 blade with the tonneau tip. Just the hide breach is the first factor. There's number one, getting in the door. Even with the sharp tonneau tip, it takes a considerable amount of force just to breach the hair and the hide. So anyway, we started with the tip of the broadhead.
Mm-hmm.
The lowest hide breach threshold we could build for the tip was a pyramid shape, or sharp pyramid shape. And what guys don't understand, this was baffling in my mind for a long time, because why would a 3 blade with our the drop point 3 blade, you could push it through a piece of cowhide. We're using like a thick piece of cowhide.
Mm-hmm.
It would just go right through it like butter, like 1.5-2 pounds of pressure, just gone. And then you take a super sharp tonneau tip 2 blade, or even just take, for example, a needle point. Not needle point, but we just take a Zwicky broadhead,
Mm-hmm.
2 blade, sharpen it up to razor sharp, belt sanded, super smooth sharp edge all the way to the point, which is a tip curler. But we didn't, for this test, I was just doing it for the test. That's double. It's like 4 pounds.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
I'm like, no way. So we redid that a couple times. We're like, okay, 3 blades better. Then we went to the tonneau tip, so for tip strength, because if you can't, when you run those tips out straight edge, even on the Zwickies or the razor heads and stuff like that, if you take that, it's a tip curler. So
Mm-hmm.
you got to get rid of that, because as soon as that tip curls, it shatters your penetration, and especially if you hit a bone or anything like that. So we started looking. So we ended up, okay, it's got to be 3 tip, but then the 3 blade, even the long skinny 3 blades like VPA and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
those were okay, but heavy tissue would still throw the brakes. The resistance was too high, even with the long ones. The shorter ones, it was terrible for bone and stuff, but even the longer ones, they were kind of semi 3-to-1 ratio in the 3 blade. This still had the mechanical advantage wasn't there of the 3-to-1 2 blade. The 2 blade would just blow through. 3 blade would just, we're using 3/4 plywood. Even with the compound bow,
Mm-hmm.
we sharpen up those 3 blades they have a little bit softer steel, and even with a 70-pound compound and a 700 grain arrow that we're building with these outserts and stuff,
Yeah.
3/4 plywood would just stick in it. In fact, I had a 70-pound Matthews Monster that I was using for testing, and it wouldn't go through that. I'm like, So I'm like, if it doesn't go through that, that's trouble. So anyway, we just decided that we're going to sacrifice the point thing. I'm going way into the weeds on this broadhead
you're
design,
fine.
but here's
This is,
the point I was making was
yeah.
we started with the broadhead.
Yeah.
And then originally the broadhead, once we got to the broadhead design, so we ended up building the 3 blade with 2 blade. My friend Dwayne Jessup, who's the owner of Thunderhorn in Montana, we were going to go all in on the 2 blade with this improvements that I've made to it. Like, it would be similar to Cutthroat now,
Mm-hmm.
which is a really good broadhead. This is before Cutthroat. And he's like, hey, before you do that, he goes, you need to look at this old broadhead we used to use. And it was an old Martin Penetrator 3 blade. And he goes, if you modify it, we used to modify it like this and drop point the tip and smooth out the angle change and round the fins on it. And he's like, this broadhead really has been something we've used for years. And he used to own a bow or archery shop there in Hamilton. I guess he's like, hey, I've known of hundreds of elk that have been shot with this style. And he goes, I don't know of a single broadhead failure.
Hmm.
And he sent me one, because he's hoarding them like, they're gold. And he's like, I'll send you. I'm like, just send me one. He goes, well, okay, I'll send you one. And he sent it to me. And so I took it. I mounted it. It was a glue on. It was 100 grains. Just with real thin steel. And, I mean, just like kind of like the junky old time stuff. And so I glued it on. I did some flight testing with it. Shot pretty good. Then I started shooting thin stuff. Then I was like, okay, it's working pretty good. So then I put up the plywood. A 3/4 plywood, sharpened it up. I'm like, this bro's going to shatter this thing. Because, I just had it mounted on a broadhead adapter. And I'm like, shoot it through. It blew right through the plywood. And I was like, holy smokes. Get it back. The broadhead was dull because the steel's not quite what it should be. But it was pretty impressive. So I was like, God dang, that's pretty damn impressive. And it's got the drop point, the pyramid style tip. It's a steep pyramid. But, I mean, I'm like, if we put that broadhead on steroids with modern technology and machined it out of a single piece, because I don't want any removable blades or anything. I wanted, zero failure is what we're looking for. I'm like, we might have something there, So then we went and, long story short, we had it machined out of some pretty good steel. And then now we have machined out of the best steel we can find for sharpness and strength and everything. So, that's how the broadhead started. Then we had to test, and it was just with the regular screw-in converter-point stuff. And so I'm like, well, we need to test the strength of this thing to see how strong it is. So I wanted something that was reusable, not going to bend or break on impact with a game animal, and or elk bones or elk shoulders. And I want it to be so you could resharpen it. You could actually shoot your hunting arrow, because I used to have the practice broadheads. Then you screw out. You never really shoot your. I was so careful. I'd screw on my hunting broadhead, go shoot it one time, make sure it's hitting good. And if it hit pretty good, then I was like, okay, I can shoot it. And then if it didn't hit good, I'm like, well, let's try another one. And you put another one on until you get one that's but you want to shoot it one time, and most of the time they start getting dull after one shot into foam. And I'm like, that's another thing that got in my mind after a while. I was like, why, if my broadhead's getting dull in foam, what's that mean by the time it cuts through the hair and the hide and some fat and stuff? By the time it gets to the goodies, it's got to be dull. It's getting dull in foam, So I was like, anyway, that's another part of the broadhead building process. But after we built the broadhead, did the bone test, and it was just blowing up bone like crazy, even on the super light setups. I mean, I bought a 40-pound wooden longbow, made a 480 grain arrow, just lightest setup I could make that I had, and that was legal for hunting in most places. And hung up an elk scapula and just blew right through it. And through the flat part, and then I ended up the thicker part, shot that, just blew it apart, and I was like, well, that's pretty neat. I mean, it was actually quite surprising, because I thought, and I hung it in the midair in front of the target, not against anything.
Really? And it still went through? It went
through without, it didn't even, it went through it like it wasn't even there, like a piece of paper.
Huh.
And I was like, that's something.
Yeah.
So I, then we had to then I was doing a strength test, see if we could try to break them or whatever. So, but the arrows kept breaking, and because the components we bought, because gold tip's supposed to be, super strong. So we bought the gold tip hunters, some cheaper ones, and then all the components started, the arrow would fail, or you were shooting the steel plates at frontals and quartering shots on the steel plate and stuff for relative strength testing, and all of the arrow was always failing. The broadhead was still sitting there like, well, what else you got? So it was like, okay, so now we got to build. Gold tip didn't even have the long aluminum ones, so I went out. The first thing I built was out of aircraft grade aluminum, broadheads that were or inserts that were 2.5 inches longer than the standard gold tip one. They're about 2.5 inches. Glued those in, and I machined some aluminum sleeves that went over the outside. At first, we were using 22/16 or something. We were just cutting into 1-inch chunks and gluing it on. And then finally, that worked pretty good. But then I was like, well, if we're gonna do this, might as well have machine parts that go over the end. And so I machined similar out of aircraft grade aluminum, 70-75. And then that started getting stronger, but that's adding weight to the front. And so then we could actually shoot them into the steel plate, and they'd bounce off. And that was pretty cool. Then they would, even when we shot them, they would bend a little bit into a steel plate at a 45, but not much. And I'm like, well, because I'm testing this for relative strength so that we could extrapolate it into bone. So, and I was like, well, on green bone, okay, now we've got a setup. The broadhead's not being bent, in fact, the original ones were called green meanies. We never broke one. And they were made out of S7 tool steel, regular screw in, and but they had green Teflon on them, like a puke green color.
Yes.
So that's why we call them. But they're so nasty and sharp. We just called them the green minis because they would never break. And anyway, so we tested those, and then I was always trying to find the most lethal, accurate setup we could build. So once we started, we got the front end strength figured out. Then we started looking at how we could better deliver that head. It was pretty awesome. We had pretty good weight forward, moderate to high weight forward. Overall arrow weight was not quite where we wanted. It was still kind of heavy. So we're still pushing, in the mid 500s, and that's guys use that, but that's a pretty small percentage. And that's when I'm starting thinking about, this broadhead, if we're going to sell it, because I'm thinking about guys had to want it. I mean, it's a 2-blade penetration and bone breach with 3-blade head. I mean, this thing's pretty dang awesome. And but we had to build a delivery system behind it to maximize its performance. And so we built the strength in. Overall weight wasn't right there for most guys, and or for me, because I'm like, this stuff's still kind of heavy, lobbing logs. And so we went to the Axis style arrow to try to reduce that shaft, because we're still trying to reduce all the friction and drag for two things. One, flight through the air. We want to stay up longer, less resistance, for speed and everything. So a smaller diameter is always going to fly faster with less resistance. And also through tissue, soft or heavy tissue, the smaller the diameter, the more penetration. I mean, we see it all the time in the targets out here. I mean, in a lot of the stuff that we see out here with our arrows it's all shaft drag, because the targets are built to slow it down on shaft drag. So a fatter shaft's going to slow it down faster than a skinnier shaft. But so we went to the Axis arrow, and then to build the strength, we were doing the sleeves like a lot of guys like Chris Dunlap's doing now with those sleeves and stuff. We did the hidden insert with the sleeve, and then even with the Axis arrow, the grains per inch was still too heavy.
Right.
So then James Orr down in Southern Oregon is like, hey, have you seen that new Rampage from Black Eagle? And I was like, no. He goes, well, they're just like the Axis, but they're lighter. So as soon as I saw that, I'm like, phew, that's what we're looking for. So we bought some of those, but we don't do the half outs on the 204 diameter at all, because it just kind of destroys. This is going to piss some people off, but it kind of destroys the whole idea of the 204 shaft, the inside diameter. That shaft diameter was built for the hidden insert. So when you install that hidden insert, that thing's back in there like 2 inches or more than 2 inches. Then when you screw the head on, it kind of creates like a footing on the inside. The only thing that they never did that was kind of a shame is they never gave you sleeves for them. Because that was the weak point. As soon as you sleeve that up, and we tested all different lengths of sleeve and end up with a 1-inch sleeve. It's only about 10, 11 grains, and we're just cutting the old Easton aluminum tubing that fit on there. It fit on perfect on a lot of the Axis arrows. They were a little bit big on the Rampages. But those would strengthen the front end so you could maintain your structural integrity, which is, that's one of the key components of the ultimate arrow system for hunting. So, so then we're like, okay, this is it. We're going to make these sleeves, but we're going to build them. We're going to machine them and have them come over the end of the arrow, so that they weren't just a tube, aluminum tubing on the outside. But then about that time, I was like, I thought VAPs were too expensive, and I was, I bought when I was testing all these other shafts and everything, I was just buying at retail, and because I had the time and money to do it, I was just testing stuff myself. I quit reading magazines pretty much.
Really?
And well, at that point, because I used to read them cover to cover, traditional ones, Bow Hunter magazine, all that stuff, and pretty soon you start realizing that when you're super into it like that, it's kind of the same stuff, and they start recycling it. And so, I mean, I would only just go through and look for any new stuff coming out, and then buy it, of course, and then try it, and like a lot of guys are doing now. And then, so I'd heard about these VAP arrows, and the Victory VAPs, and I'm like, you know what? Because I tested the Victory V-Force HV. I don't even know if they make it anymore.
I'm not familiar with
but
those
it was
at
a
all.
5/16 shaft. It was like their V-Force, but it was a thin wall. So it was like, so you could still get the stiffness, but it was super light. Yeah, so when I ran our components or long inserts in those with the outsert over the outside, the sleeve, and I could shoot those into steel plate frontal shots over and over again. I'm like, oh my God. And the FOC was like 25%.
Holy smokes.
And I'm like, the Holy Grail. I go, we got it. This is it. We're going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And, but then I go, okay, so with the frontal, I mean, over and over, just banging off a steel plate at 20 yards. Just bounce back and almost hit you. I'm like, that's pretty awesome. All right, well, let's do the oblique angle test. So then we turned the steel plate at about a 45. And I think that arrow blew up before it even hit it. Because and blew it up like it's almost like you put a M80 in it and just blew it to bits.
Yeah.
And I was like, talked about heartbreak.
Yeah.
I was like, I went from the ultimate arrow to there's no possible way we could hunt with this thing.
Right.
In like 2 seconds, So I was like, God dang it. And so that's when we did the axis thing. I jumped around a little bit. So then we did the axe thing, then went to the rampage for lighter grains per inch. And then so we're almost all in on the rampage, the 204 thing with the hidden insert and the sleeves. We were just going to make the sleeves on the outside, but they would actually go over the end of the shaft also to kind of lock it all in and strengthen that all up there. And I just decided to buy some of the, because we're having pretty good luck with the Victory stuff. So I'm like, I'm just going to buy some of these VAPs and try them. Let's give them a shot. So I bought some V6s. Back then they were called V6. And we'll just test. I was going to do some testing, see how they fly, whatever. Very first shot. So I knew what spine and everything, and I had this weight forward setup. Very, very first shot with that arrow, I went, oh my God.
Really?
That's amazing. It flew so. I never had an arrow that flew like that. I mean, it was just like the most pure. I just like to call it pure flight. It was the most pure flight I'd ever seen.
And that's when I shot your setup that you rigged up for me. Like just watching that arrow go, I'm like, it was one of the best flights I've seen in an arrow that I've shot out of my bows.
I couldn't figure out how to, because I don't know.
Yeah.
That's why I tell guys, even on the test kit, I go, you will know, because it's going to be pure.
Yeah.
When it's pure, there's no wiggle, there's no. It's just like it was. It almost looks like it's on a string, or it has a mission to get to where it's going. It's just very strange. And then, but that was my first reaction with the very first time I shot him, and. So then I couldn't stop shooting. So I sat out there for like a half an hour shooting these things, just going, oh my God, these things are so great. Just drilled them. And then I started, breaking arrows. And so I'm like, okay, so we got to pick different dots. But then after about 20 minutes, my group started growing. And I'm like, well, I must be getting tired or whatever, So I stopped shooting and just, I'm just getting tired. So then I go in the garage, and I just happened. I'm like, I'm thinking about these things are so cool, man. I can't believe it. This is awesome. So then I go just roll one on a spinner real quick just to see how straight they are. And then I look, and that tip's flopping around. And I'm like, what the hell? Why is that tip flopping around? And turned out the insert, the innie-outie, was bent. I'm like, why'd that thing? So I grabbed it and I pushed down and I straightened it out with just my fingers. Just my fingers. And I'm like, whoa. And then so I had the aluminum. Back then, that was their original, their first design. Everybody had the same experience with those because they weren't very strong. They shot awesome, but there wasn't a lot of strength there. So I bought the stainless ones for increased strength, and they still kind of did the same thing. But I knew at that point that the lightweight micro diameter was the platform for our broadhead. I just had to figure out a way to screw that broadhead on to that micro diameter shaft. And so we did all kinds. There's guys doing stuff now that we did. This is like 12, 15 years ago. Inserting, we use bamboo, carbon rods, steel rods, aluminum, titanium, all that stuff, with sticking in 2 inches of rod, outsert over the top, just a regular standard outsert over the top, and it's just still, it was better, but it still wasn't very. No matter what we used, it still wasn't very strong. And then we started getting into where all those components weighed so much, then it would limited us on head. So we'd have to drop back to like the head weights we couldn't build a strong head with. So that's why like our lightest head right now is 150. I can't, with our head, even our shorties, we can't build one that won't, but like we can't guarantee no failure on any lighter than that. But So then it took me a long time. I was sitting there stewing on this because I'm like, we can't do anything until we figure out how to get this shaft with this broadhead. And so I'm sitting there looking at our broadhead, and our broadheads had the converter point, the regular screw and stuff on the back. And I remember sitting there, and it was in my garage again, and I'm sitting there looking at that converter point system, and I'm looking at this skinny carbon tubing, And I'm going, oh, shoot, I'm going to figure out how to screw this. I'm like, well, Fred Bear designed this, like, in, I don't know what year it was, but it was a long time ago and patented it and all that stuff. And I'm like, so that's old school. So it just hit me like that old school stuff. And I looked at this super skinny, lightweight carbon shaft. I'm like, this is freaking new school.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, why am I trying to screw in old school with new school? I'm like, why don't I just make new school screw into new school? Because I'm sitting there banging, and there's a lot of companies out now building things to screw in there's regular converter point systems. And there's a lot of reasons for that, because you can build broadheads. The lightweight broadheads are very cheap to make, most of them. They're a lot cheaper and easier. And with the converter point in the back, that's a lot cheaper and easier also. So it's a lot more affordable, and more guys can buy, for the majority of archers. So, but I wasn't building this for everybody, actually. I was kind of just building it for me. And I'm like, the best way I can do this would be, Dan Evans did it with a pin and his ATAC broadhead. He built that one broadhead with a pin. And I talked to him about that. He said he hadn't sell hardly any of those. Sold like one. And I'm like, no way. And he's like, yeah, no one would buy glue in. And I knew that, because nobody wants to glue in. I did I still do traditional archery, and I don't like glue on. Glue on's a pain. Nobody wants to do glue on. I want to screw heads on and go shoot my arrows. So, but Dan was onto something with those ATACs, because he was. That's one of the reasons when I was starting to design my stuff. I'm like, yeah, he's got the idea. He's doing the pin on the head. But I'm like, we can't have glue on. But I'm sitting there just go. Well, that's when it just hit me. Why not just put the threads right behind the head?
Yeah.
And have the pin on it. I was like, well, someone's got to be doing that, And I looked around and I just drew it all up, had some built, and hired a guy to look around and go see who's got this patent on this thing, because we needed to do it, and we needed to license it from him. And he's like, yeah, no one has it. And I'm like, what? How's that possible? Because it makes perfect sense. Once you see it, you're like, well, that's the first thing when I saw it. It was the same thing with the broadhead. When I first saw that broadhead design with the skinny tip, with the flare and the thing in the back and the 3-blade, I'm like, somebody's got to have that. And Dwayne's like, no, they used to have it, but the factory burned down and they just quit making it. I'm like, are you?
Somebody had it and they just
and I'm like, well, that's the whole thing. When I saw it, I'm like, why is this not on the market? The Shuttle T is similar, but it's like they took the design and then they took everything out of it to make it cheap.
Yes.
So they took all the good stuff out of it, which made that style of head. My understanding is they had the penetrator design, which is similar to ours, and then whoever bought it took it somewhere, and they had the accountant start working the numbers, and then they ended up with the little tiny Shuttle T-lock.
Yeah.
So I was like, which was a great broadhead. I used to recommend that to guys that would just
and then they went downhill.
Well, something happened there. Dan is no longer in charge of that stuff.
Yeah,
but
it used to be a really popular head.
No, that's the head that I used to tell guys all the time. They're like, well, I can't afford all that stuff. I'm like, well, then go get you some hidden inserts, put some sleeves on it. And right now, I send them over to Chris. Get some sleeves from Chris over at Elk River, and then get Shuttle Tees.
Mm-hmm.
I go, you pretty much have a neck down version of what we do, and it's a killer setup.
Yeah.
And if you put some brass, get the lightweight, like a Victory VAP or something, or our arrows or whatever, but or not VAP, but the Rips, or one of those, or Access or whatever. That's a great setup. As long as you put the hidden insert, sleeve, you could even use the aluminum. Now, there's a lot of good broadheads out now, like Iron Will. Solid makes a good one. There's some good stuff out there. But they're too expensive. But if you want the store bought, that's the 100%. That's who I went to every time. Just get the Shuttle Tees. But now I hear the shit they're not. I don't even know what to recommend for store bought right now.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know that the guys were having them fall apart, and that seemed like it was a few years ago when that switch happened. But and you're describing the setup that you would recommend if they didn't go with yours is kind of like my setup here.
That's what. Yeah, you pretty much have it, except what they call it, footers now. Pretty long.
Yeah,
a lot longer than we used to use.
Yeah, and I kind of want to go into the center pin on your system, because you brought up something that I'm like, with the arrow flexing and then having the center pin in there, you also installed a little rubber dampener in the back.
Yeah.
Go over that for me real quick.
So once we got the pin design and the threading, so No one had it, so we ended up getting the patent on it because I'm like, this is totally amazing. How does no one have this thing? It's totally amazing. And so, but then I was, after thinking it through, so we started with the point of the broadhead. We're working our way back through. Then we do the micro threads in the front, right behind the head, so that we can, so that I don't want to vibrate and loose either, because that's cost me. I try to take out all the things that have cost me animals in the past, and remove all that. Anything I can control before I release the arrow. I want to do whatever I can before, because once you release the arrow, it's over. Everything up to that point, you can control that and make the most effective projectile you can. Have all the best gear, all the best, trained to shoot the most accurate you can. But the instant you release that arrow, you have no control over what happens next. So my theory was I need to do everything beforehand, especially on my arrow, so give me the best possible chance of success. I don't want any weak links on my arrow at all. So that's why we started with the head and built the platform behind it. So we get back to the pin, and we set the pin depth similar to like a hidden insert depth, because that seemed to work really good. We extended a little bit. But then I was thinking, okay, so if we do hit some bone hard or something that wants to try to snap our arrow right behind the outsert, our sleeve comes over like an outsert, but then all the outserts usually break right behind the outsert, or the outsert usually bends, or they break right behind the outsert every time with little to no pressure. And so we ran the pin back behind the outsert about a half an inch or so that it never breaks right behind we call it a center pin sleeve. The energy that's trying to snap your arrow will still keep going back and try to break you off back at the tail of the pin. But then, so we installed grooves with rubber bushings in the back to cushion that shock and transfer that energy further away, so that usually if you do hit, it won't break on game bones. That was our number one goal.
Right.
Of our structural integrity was zero failure on impact with game animals, whether it's Cape buffalo or Coues deer. So, and that's where we stopped on building strength into our system. We stopped at that. We could, because everybody wants to shoot rocks and concrete and stuff like that. And I said, we could build that, but we build stuff to kill shit. And that's what we would build in strength for zero failure. And then just same thing with the tip, with the drop point of the tip. Everyone's like, oh, that thing's going to curl. Well, yeah, if you hit a rock, it'll probably curl a little bit, but not on a game animal. I mean, that's where we kept shaping that tip and drawing it in and shooting. We were shooting elk scapulas and stuff until it stopped bending or nicking or whatever. And then we left it there because we want that hide breach. So we want, the deepest, we want to go in as easy as possible. And there's a lot of guys can attest to how easy they go in things.
Yeah.
So, but
was it a South that stabbed himself?
South tried to cut his Achilles, and Brinker tried to kill himself. Yeah. So, but we made shorter ones now for those guys, so that we blunted the tip a little bit on it.
There you go.
For the beginners, but so that's what when we built the strength into our system. That's what we built too, for the pin length, and style, the sleeve length, because we're still trying to balance that strength. Well, zero failure, but with overall weight too. So the pin length's built to a certain point. Then we put the rubber bushing to cushion the blow so that it wouldn't break in the front while it's penetrating. It may, get knocked around, but it's still going to maintain. There's no tip curl, no tip breaking, no breaking throughout the broadhead body, no bending or breaking throughout the sleeve, the pin, clear back to about the middle. And that would be, and guys do break them if they somehow don't get all the way through, and the animals can shear the arrow off with their scapulas or whatever. They start running if they don't get it past through, but which is rare. So so when we built that's what the rubber bushing is in the back, and it does two things. It cushions that on the shock on the heavy oblique impacts that are trying to snap you off right behind the head, and it also acts as a vibration dampener, so your head's coupled with our micro diameter threads. Your heads almost never vibrate loose, and even if they are loose, they're not going to rattle. So in fact, you could even shoot once in a while. I'll shoot a broadhead, and it will just shoot a tiny bit funny, and you get up there and the thing's like unscrewed an eighth of an inch. But I mean, with the standard screw and stuff, you're not even. I mean, it's disaster. I missed a deer by 3 feet with just that exact same thing, and it was only unscrewed, slightly. So,
I want because you and I talked for a while before we had you on the podcast. There's two things I want to go over real quick. The first one is you've tested the footers extensively prior to arriving at your current setup, and you said after about an inch there wasn't much benefit, because I was thinking about going to a longer footer, and your testing would say otherwise.
I don't. Usually the arrow's broken by the time you need that extra footing, unless you want to add weight. But that's why we build the components at the weights you need, so you don't need to add weight. Because that always bugged me, either putting weight tubes in your shaft or adding idle weights inside there.
Yep.
Well, I did it. I did all that stuff. That's what I told guys. I said I've done that. I even put weights. I even put knock adapters in the back from Gold Tip and was screwing weights in the back end of my arrow, like going backwards. I did it.
Really?
I mean, I used to have 70 grains in the back end of my arrow.
You're kidding me.
No. So that's what I tell guys. I've done that.
That's funny.
I've done a lot of that stuff. I mean, I used to test everything with the open mind.
Yeah.
That's why I say when we built my only stipulation was to build the most accurate, lethal arrow combo possible. Period. That's the threat, and in a moderate weight.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't matter if it's high FOC, low FOC. We're open to everything, because I mean that's what we tried. I tried that. I mean, I was doing weights in the back, weights in the front, weights on both ends. No FOC, 100 grain points, super heavy shafts, light. Then we got to where everything started focusing in on certain things. And the same thing happened when Ashby was doing his thing. He started going up in FOC, and all things started, we noticed groups started tightening.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and he was doing the penetration thing. He noticed his penetration started getting better. And that's when, we do a lot of pondering.
Yeah.
I do a lot of pondering. I mean, this is pretty much all I really think about almost all the time for years. And I was trying to think about why all this stuff happens and why does it happen and stuff. So it ended up, I think I was talking with not Garrett. What's the name from Grizzly Stick?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't met him yet.
Talking with the Grizzly Stick guy, and he's like, yeah, so it's like throwing lawn darts or something. The head is out there throwing the thing. And I'm like, that makes good sense, because that's pretty much what it is. And, but that was years ago, and the first time I tried it, I didn't change my fletching or anything. And, a lot of things have come around after that. That's when I had the arrows dropping like rocks. Because if you gob the fletching on, arrows drop like rocks. So the weight forward doesn't really have much to do with it. It's because the fletching, it just is like giant brakes on the back, like parachute, which you don't need. The heavier the weight up front, or the more weight forward you are, the less control you need in the back. But if you're using a heavy shaft, you're still going to need more control in the back, because that shaft weighs a lot. So that's why we like the lightweight shaft. We can reduce, it weighs a lot lighter in the back.
Yeah.
So to keep that thing straight, it requires a lot less fletching. Plus with that the weight up front, pulling the lightweight shaft, I mean, we use 4 minis on the back on all our stuff, just for reduced, and because we're still trying to reduce drag. So for overall drag and resistance in the whole system, because we're still fighting, we're reducing that heavy bone breach threshold down. I mean, we're balancing all this stuff out and trying to get to that moderate weight and still have the heavy, the full Ashby, quote, bone breach and, lethality.
Without the actual Ashby weight.
Without the weight. So we try to improve everything.
Yeah.
So we've worked it from the tip. We're through the broadhead. Now we're at the structural integrity where the broadhead meets the arrow. We fix that. Now we're working on the whole entire arrow platform with the weight forward system. So after we did extensive testing on it, and I think hopefully the push guys are going to do one here with that, like a legit test, because there's a lot of factors that have to, even on these broadhead tests, there's so many factors that you have to think about, because you can kind of adjust, leave things out or put things in to skew all kinds of results.
Right.
So
I'd love to talk to you about and you've already covered this with me outside the podcast, but for the listeners, not having the knock follow the broadhead seems to be a big hiccup with a lot of guys shooting the really heavy FOCs in wind, and having the tail kind of leave the path of where the arrow's going, kind of counter. Walk me through what your arrow system does with your broadhead, because it really intrigued me what we were talking about earlier.
Well, we did the preface this with we shoot It doesn't. When I open mind in developing this whole system, so wherever worked the best, we would go that way.
Yeah.
Whatever didn't work, we just walk by whatever didn't work. So we just kept improving, no matter what. I mean, broadhead, we have a hard time improving the broadhead right now. I mean, we've introduced the short jag and the short bees for guys that are either have super short quivers or, it's a little bit more easy to swallow than our full profile jagger. But besides that, we go wherever the most accurate lethal pathway takes us. So I tell guys all the time, if something was better, we'd immediately go that direction.
Right.
So I mean, if you want to build like an ultimate strong arrow, you'd have to use a thick wall carbon, run with a center pin system with steel components, pretty much bomb proof. There's nothing better out there for bomb proof for if you don't want your arrows to break. I mean, you might break nocks and stuff, but nocks are cheap. But we are not looking at that. I'm looking at performance and lethality. So we're doing accuracy in hunting conditions and lethality, the maximum lethality in the largest variety of circumstances you can encounter. I mean, there's going to be shots where nothing's going to work but a 700 grain arrow on certain animals or certain situations or certain shot angles or something like that. But for the 90, we try whatever percent it is, the largest percentage of shots encountered or experiences encountered in the outdoors under the most external weather conditions and all that stuff, wind, rain, snow, cold, warm, whatever. That's what we want to build in. So the most forgiving, stable, accurate platform in the outdoors, in the mountains, things like that. So, and that's what our test, and that's what it's been. The more weight forward we can go, and the extreme weight forward, guys are freaking out a lot about extreme weight forward, but extreme weight forward on compounds, not really that extreme with the components that are available today. You're talking like mostly it's 8, depending on their bow setup and whatever, but it's like 18 to 20%. I mean, to get above that, it takes either it's hard to do. You can't really do it, and that's what our setups are usually. Most guys with shooting our system is right around 19 to 20%. I mean, that's pretty much money. And then our arrow weights are about 450. This I'm talking about average everyday shooter.
Yeah.
Running a 70-pound, anywhere from a 60 to 70-pound bow. Arrow weights are 450 to 500, low 500s in there.
So when you set me up with my arrow this morning, I was like, I'm going to have to shoot a 600 grain arrow because I thought your whole thing was high FOC, heavy arrow, because I heard it's always centered around Ashby, and then when you like 400, what's your grain? 457. Okay, here you go. I'm like, wait, what? And so I was like shocked. I'm like, that's right in my wheelhouse. And the FOC was, what was the FOC on my arrow?
Do you have the 200 grain heads?
I think that's what you put on.
Yeah, you would have been at 20%.
Yeah, and I got better arrow fight than my current setup, which I'm always looking for the next better thing, but I don't want to go much heavier than 500 grains because I like the trajectory. I've shot it for many years. If I have to compensate for height, I know how much. I'm just used to it.
Well, and that's one of the biggest factors. In the beginning, when we were setting guys up, we didn't bring the chronograph out. We had a range out to about 80 yards, flat range. And we'd set guys up. We get them dialed up close, so then we'd start walking them back. We get out to about 70, 80 yards, and then we start adding head weight. Started adding FOC until you got to the point where you would reach a point where at about 50, 60 yards, those arrows would start diving. So then we back it up to where we had a nice easy arc out to about 70. I mean, nothing. It's just nice, smooth, just because our arcs are a lot smoother too than guys using more fletching, because those go out. They might come out of the box hotter, but after about 50 yards, they really start breaking harder. And ours will just kind of maintain velocity with a lot smoother arc. That's why sometimes it can be hard to get sight tapes that work because they're mostly set up for lighter weight arrows with blazers. Because that's like 90% of the industry.
Yeah.
So, but that's one of the things that there's been a big misconception, I think, because everyone's talking about extreme FOC. 19% is not that extreme. 19, 20%, and you're talking about the same weight arrow. And we tried to hit the sweet spot as like full metal jacket and a 100 grain head. That's 450 right there
Yeah.
for almost 90% of the guys.
Well, why a lot of guys would consider that extreme, from my personal prep experience, is they're not using like what you did, the lighter GPI arrows. They're trying to get that 19% with a FMJ,
With the higher grains per inch
and that
arrow,
just doesn't make sense.
you can do it, but then you're going to end up 600.
Yeah, exactly.
So
and that's not where I want to be.
That's what I did when I was telling you I was running the the hip full Ashby. I was using FMJs.
Oh,
And I was at like one of my, it was like 650, and one of the other ones on my heavy bow was like 720. But I had my 24% FOC.
yeah.
But it's just lobbing logs, and I have guys that want to buy into that right now. They're like, dude, I'm gonna go full 650. I'm like, I'm gonna tell you right now what's gonna happen. I go, you gotta think it's great. You might get something, you may not. And then at about maybe this year, but next year for sure. If you go to any 3D shoots at all, you're going to be like, this stuff sucks. And that's exactly what I did. I'm like, I don't want to keep doing this. It's no fun.
I want to ask you, with all the testing that you've done, I've wanted to set up this test, but I'm so busy on my YouTube channel, is if you have 2 arrows, and I think I already know the answer to it, but I'm really, really interested in hearing your perspective. If you have 2 arrows, 450 grains apiece, one's, let's just give it a really shitty 5% FOC.
Yeah, you can go 11.
And then, because this with like 100 grain without the footer and just 100 grain, it sits around 10% or 11%. But you have a 10% FOC arrow, and then you have your 20%, 19% FOC arrow, same exact weight.
Same exact weight, same exact tune.
Yeah, give me the penetration difference. Is there any difference in penetration?
Post bone breaching penetration will be deeper. Well, post bone breach. Now, soft tissue. There's 2 things that we need to think about here also is soft tissue doesn't really matter unless the animal's moving.
Okay.
If the animal's moving, high FOC wins every time. That's one of the tests that Ashby didn't do that we thought about considerably. 2 things that matter on a moving animal, like especially like southern whitetails, coos, deer, things that are always
Jumpy.
wheeling. They're always jumping when you hit them.
Yeah.
Even, for me, even elk sometimes. They're trying to wheel out of there. Shaft diameter. Shaft drag becomes very important on a moving animal, and high FOC.
Okay, so you will get increased penetration when your arrow hits something hard with a higher FOC because it's pulling through.
If it glancing blows and things like that, yes. The high FOC, once you hit that threshold, that's the 18, I don't know where it is, like 18, 19, whatever, right in there.
Yeah.
We start around 19%.
Okay.
Because there you're safe. That's where the head's pulling the shaft. The shaft is no longer driving the head. When you get that coupled with shaft drag, like fatter shafts on a moving animal, tremendous drag, tremendously more drag. There's exponentially more shaft diameter, even if you go up like from the super skinnies we use, the micro diameter, to like the axis size, even though it's only like a 64th diameter. But that's a tremendous, it's not a 64th more surface area. It's like whatever that formula is for volume, it's way more. So and going up to the 5/16, it's way, even worse than that for shaft drag. And so on a still animal, and Ashby did a lot of shaft diameter tests on. He was just testing it, comparing it to the ferrule diameter, whether the ferrule diameter of the broadhead was bigger or smaller than the shaft on dead animals. They weren't moving, but which, obviously the smaller the shaft, that worked better on the dead guys. But when the animal's moving, or you glance off something like a rib or whatever, that's what the post bone breach penetration. That's where the shaft diameter, or not shaft, the weight forward thing and shaft diameter comes big into play.
That's really interesting. Well, you saved me a bunch of time because I built 3 different arrows. I spent hours trying to figure out what arrows, and trying to get the very like apples to apples diameters and everything. And then I was shooting them out, 80 yards and just comparing, what the different FOC setups were, trying to get them within, 1 to 2 grains, just to be tight tolerances. And then doing penetration tests isn't easy because there's just so many factors in creating a test.
But and so penetration and foam target is all shaft drag. That's it. It's not. I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah.
But shaft drag is important for certain situations. So shaft drag is important on moving animal, and or if your arrow's not going straight through them when the animal's moving, or you're glancing off of ribs or bones and stuff like that. Anytime that arrow's moving, that larger surface area is going to create more drag, more friction. So that's kind of one of the where shaft drag comes into play on that. But it's very difficult to do penetration tests then you could do bone tests, But bone test is not straight up because bones aren't on the outside of an animal.
Right.
They're inside of an animal. That's another thing you can think about with our system is I tell guys, with our weight forward system coupled with our broadhead design, when we hit bone, there's no resistance to our head breaking the hide. Like our broadhead, the holes that our broadhead makes is as big as the broadhead. Because it doesn't have to sit there and press on that hide. It just goes right through the hide. Zero resistance. So when we hit the bone, you're getting maximum amount of energy transferred to the bone when you hit it. So with the other heads, with less, that takes more resistance just to poke through the hide. And you'll know this if you shoot the deer and you get a giant hole you have a 1-inch broadhead and you have a 3-inch hole in that hide, broadside. That hide was while that broadhead's pushing on that hide, pressing in, stretching, then the hide pops.
Right.
So you have this giant 3-inch gaping hole, but you just ate up half your energy maybe, and you can't get through it. So by the time you get to the bone, you got nothing left. It's like so then if you couple that with your steep angle point or your dual hit point, then you hit a scapula, you're toast. It's not going in. I mean,
yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
That makes sense now, but I mean, I've done that. I've shot them.
Yeah.
You hear the loud crack, arrow goes in 2 inches, falls off, or they break it off and take off.
Yeah.
And you're just like, you just spent 3 weeks trying to get that shot. It's freaking heartbreaking.
I've got a. I'm not gonna say it's a loaded question for you here, but I've got a question that I see it all the time, and for me, with all the testing and everything that I've done, I see the word kinetic energy come up all the time. I'm like, why are we saying kinetic energy when we should be saying momentum?
Because speed matters more with kinetic energy. I don't like talking about it, but momentum, because it's like I was just talking with a guy yesterday about it came up and something. I'm like, yeah, I got a bow at home, a 70-pound long bow with a longbow setup, a 740 grain arrow. It's got like 50 pounds kinetic energy. It'd blow through Cape Buffalo easy. It does like 170 feet a second. It's not anything. It's not legal, but it doesn't. But you could probably almost shoot through a car with it.
Really?
So it's not like that's very. Kinetic energy relies more on speed. It's like it's not a very good. It's a semi-indicator, but it's not momentum and. Arrow weight, I mean, there's a lot of factors for lethality and penetration and bone breach because time of impulse is how long the head pushes on the bone to break the bone because bones can be elastic and you need there's no substitute for arrow mass, but speed helps. We like speed, but kinetic energy is. I wish more people would rely on momentum.
Well, yeah, I mean,
it relies more on arrow weight, and speed's kind of a factor, and that's why we like speed for accuracy and effective range. So that's where that 270, I like around 270 to 280 feet a second. I mean, that seems to be our sweet spot because that's where we can maximize the mass and FOS, the weight forward. And so, like a common setup, if a 70-pound bow, 28-inch draw, you got to run. It depends on but you're going to run an arrow in the low 400s high 400s to low 500s, 20% FOC. Doing 275 is like the best possible setup we could build. So it gives you the best effective range, and you can pretty much blow through both elk shoulders. It's golden. I mean, it's perfect.
Well, for me, what you're saying there really hits home because I shoot, and I've stayed between about 280 and 285 for a lot of years. I just lost a shirt.
Something's flying by.
And I've stuck with that speed because I like the trajectory, and like I said, if I have to hold over or under or whatever, I know where I need to aim because I've just ran that for years. And the tuning's a breeze, and I can shoot a heavier arrow. And so now when I'm going for speed out of a bow, I'm not going for speed in general. I'm going for speed to shoot a heavier arrow and get me back down into that 280, 285.
There's a couple things to think there, though, because when you're running 285, you're running the taller veins on the back.
Yes.
So you're slowing down faster at longer ranges, too.
Yeah.
So when you push that weight forward and lighten the shaft weight, you can reduce the fletching size in the back, reducing your drag at longer range. You don't notice it up to 50 yards. It's not really noticeable at all. But once you get out a ways and that arrow starts slowing down more, it slows down faster with the larger vanes, the higher profile vanes. That's why we use the low profile.
That's a good point.
So we can come out of the bow slower, but we stay up longer.
Your shed, I believe Brian calls it shed velocity is what his terminology is.
Yeah, your shed velocity is slower.
Yeah. And I've got the heat vanes. I've been playing with those, and I've been thinking about bumping up my weight a little bit. But yeah, I mean, the more I shoot, the heavier my weight seems to get up front every year, and then the more I shoot, the closer I get to exactly where you've already arrived.
That's why most guys that's when we designed to come out with the stuff.
Yeah.
A few years ago, I was like, I knew there had to be guys that were doing the same kind of tinkering stuff.
Yeah.
And guys are always like, I kind of shoot that anyway. I'm like, yeah, but you're cobbling stuff together. I said, I'm going to save you all that time and money.
Yeah.
Because I've done almost most of the setups that guys are running now that's like new, like typical example, the sleeves and stuff, or the footers. I mean, we did that 15 years ago.
Really?
That was we're doing that back then. So
that's cool.
Well, because there was a problem with the structural integrity up front, even on the FMJs and stuff. It was still, either mushroom in or bend or break if you hit stuff. And it didn't even have to be that tough, that hard. And so, but you put that little sleeve on there, shoot, the thing was pretty much bomb-proof.
Yeah.
So, and it's never, with the sleeve on the Axis or the full metal jacket, and as long as you, I don't want to say it about steep, but if you have a high mechanical advantage broadhead, let's call it that, then with the sleeve and everything, you're not going to have failure up front. So, as long as and the sharpness is another factor that doesn't get talked about a lot.
Right.
The smooth sharp is by far and away better than a rough sharp for bleeding penetration. Yeah, with our broadheads, heavy bone penetration, smooth sharp edge, like money. And as long as you don't have blade, it's another thing with you don't want blade failure either. That's one of the things we had with the single bevels. Even when we're running the high end stuff, you're still getting blade chatter and blade curl and stuff like that on the heavy stuff. Like if you don't want to, but if you're running through pelvic bones and stuff like that, sometimes you get that happens. So with our broadheads with the 3-blade design, that's another benefit of it. There's so many. That's what I tell guys all the time when they want to hear about it. I'm like, well, there's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of factors that were built into this broadhead has already that. The reason why we use it. And a lot of guys want a 2-blade with a center pin system. Like, well, we may do one eventually because you can pack more of them in your backpack. They pack flatter, and they're easier to sharpen if you're on an extended hunt for a month. Then you can just sharpen them with the files and stones and stuff like that. Whereas our blade, you can do it and make a decent edge, but they do take up more space because they're 3 blades. But the 60-degree angle of our blades, there's no blade chatter, there's no blade roll, there's none of that. And with the smooth sharp angle, they're way easier to sharpen than a 2-blade, way easier to sharpen at home with our wheel system. Anyone can do it. 2 blades at once, you just draw them back across our wheels on a grinder, and super easy to get them, because I was a terrible broadhead sharpener. And I'd spend all kinds of time and effort and cramp thumbs.
Same here.
The whole thing, and it's just, even on the so-called sharp ones, you'd spend hours sitting there grinding on the little block on the table, trying to get them so they're hair popping. Yeah. And ours come that way. First of all, that was like a pet peeve of mine. So that's why I tell them we hand hone every single one.
Okay.
So when they come out of the box, they're popping hairs. So, but the smooth sharp, I tested that against elk scapulars also with that lightweight bow. Run a rough sharp one, just file it, shoot the elk scapula with the super light bow and that lightweight head, just hanging it in front of the target, won't go through it.
Really?
Nope, stuck in it.
That's really interesting.
And I was like, holy smokes, that's amazing. Go in there, put it on the ground. We have the grit wheel, buff it out, shaving hair, go back, shoot it through, go through it like paper. So it's even the thick part.
That's really crazy.
Yeah. So then I'm like, that's pretty cool. So then we went and got the 3/4 plywood out. Put it up, shoot it through the 3/4 plywood, razor sharp, boom, blows through. Don't sharpen it, pick it up out of the dirt behind there, dust it off, take it in, boom, shoot it through again, barely goes through, sticks 10 inches through. Pull it, unscrew it, pull it back out, put the head back on, shoot it, boom, buries to the fins. dullness, right? So to shoot it again, buries to the fins again, but a little bit shorter. The fins are buried just like they were in Brinker's leg. And so they take it back in, run it. It takes about 15 seconds on the wheels on our sharpening wheel kit. Take it back out, it's popping hairs, go back out, blows right through the three-quarter plywood.
So it sounds kind of like a work sharp almost, like a.
Well, work sharps work good, but you got to get the wider belt on there.
Okay.
And use the round part. We have videos on YouTube on how to sharpen our broadheads, but
cool.
The wheels are absolutely the best, and you get that mirror finish on them. They're super sharp. They don't feel sharp. In the beginning, when I sent them to Drake, who's working in our booth today, he's like, "These aren't sharp. I had to resharpen." I'm like, "Oh, dude." I go, whatever you have, because he didn't have the wheels or anything, it was going to dull them. They just don't feel sharp because they're smooth and the blade angle is 60 degrees. You can handle them. It's not bad, but you just can't slide them on anything. So
yeah. Well, I want to talk about your short jags real quick before we wrap this thing up, because I was when I saw them, I'm like, that's the one I like the most. Like, I like the design of it. I can screw it into my standard setup.
Very sexy. That was from Dan Evans. That's his contribution. He pulled me over at one of the shows and was like, "Hey, if you knock the nose off that thing and brought it in a little tighter," he goes, "A lot more guys would like that." I'm like, "I know, but it doesn't go through." He goes, "It doesn't matter."
Yeah.
But he goes, "But it's still going to be an awesome broadhead." I'm like, "Well, yeah, it's an awesome broadhead. It's killer. You're just giving up." You're just giving up a little bit. You're just giving up a little bit of that high breach. It's still going to go in one of the best in the industry through the hair and hide and soft tissue. But, in the super heavy bone, like the knuckle below the scapula, you're going to run into trouble there. With our full profile jagger with the long, that 3-to-1 blade, it's got the same mechanical advantage as a 3-to-1 2 blade out on the front end of that, of our regular jagger. But that's still a killer broadhead. I mean, there's nothing out there that can compete with it.
Well, you and I were talking about it. I'm like, man, that's like a shuttle T should have been. You're like, it's a shuttle T on crack.
It is. Well, it is. It is. That's what, if you were going to take every factor of the shuttle T lock and maximize it.
Yeah, it's bigger, stronger.
Bigger, stronger, one piece, no parts.
Yeah.
Steel's way better. It's S7 tool steel.
Yeah.
They're pretty much, most guys, when they shoot through hide and shoulders and stuff, it's still shaving sharp.
What do those run?
All the Jagger broadheads are $124.95 for 3-pack, and the short Bs, the Blood Eagles, and the regular Blood Eagles are all $74.95.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
So they're in the ballpark right there.
Absolutely.
This will probably be the last year they're $74.95. But
really,
unless we go big time. I mean, but on those, it takes us a lot of time. They take a lot of time to make. Those are all hand sharpened.
Oh.
And hand honed, they're hand honed and hand trued every single one.
Yeah.
So we don't use machines for any of that stuff. So
okay.
And they come sharp, ready to go, and they're all true, so that you could always, if you buy a new box, you can just screw it right on your arrow, and they'll shoot just with the other ones.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, that was really appealing because I wouldn't have to change my whole arrow setup to shoot that.
No, and that's why we build the Blood Eagles, so you can have the benefits of the Jagger profile or the short Bs or the short Jags. Yeah, improve your broadhead. The only problem is we only start at 150. That's the lightest head we make. And as soon as we came out with those, hey guys, you got to make 100. we're not making 100.
That's not what we're about.
Well, we can't do it. We just can't make. Well, we can't put enough steel in the head
to
make it do what it does, and get it at that we're pushing it with the 150 because we're taking out. we're removing a lot of steel. We're still maintaining structural integrity in all the vital areas, but and it makes a little the vents make a slight hiss sound, but the 175 is solid. And if guys would try the heavier stuff, it's not that big for most guys' arrows. If you add 50 grains, it almost doesn't do anything. Right. If you're running a 400 grain arrow with a 70-pound bow right now, you go to 450. You'll be shocked. You shoot it at 50 yards, your point of impact's maybe 4 inches. That's it. And most guys, they're usually like, no way. And I'm like, yeah, way. That doesn't do what you think. Most guys that used to come when we were in the beginning, I just immediately take their head off their 100 grain or 125 and screw on a 200 grain head and go, here. We go out to 40 yards. I said, put your pin on the bullseye and shoot it. Every single guy we've had so far shoots it high. and almost misses because they put their pin on the top of the target because they don't want to miss.
Yeah.
Shooting the Reinhardt block.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, you aimed at the top. And every guy does, and they just turn around with the look of amazement going, I can't believe that. It only dropped a little bit. And I'm like, yeah. It's not going to – it doesn't do what you think. That's adding 100 grains. So at 40 yards. But that, we've kind of refined it from there.
Yeah.
And we did it through trial and error. And we got a lot of guys on the phone that are running all these computer programs because they don't have access to all the shooting range and arrows, because most guys are like telling me what their arrow gun away when they make it up. And I'm like, well, hold on. And I'll grab one out of the bin that's exactly like they want to make. And I'm like, well, that's going to weigh right around this. And it varies, 4 plus or minus 2 or 3 grains, depending on what shaft weights you get. But that's it's not as terrible as you think. We get a lot of pushback from the so-called archery industry people because with their business model and how they run everything through all these channels and making stuff overseas, they can't produce what we make. And for them to produce heavier weight heads and stuff with quality, it costs a lot of money. And if we ran our head through like traditional retail channel and built them through all these chains and ran them through distributors and stuff, they'd be $200 for a 3-pack.
Jesus.
I mean, because you have the layers. I mean,
right.
And even if we scale up, but I think there is down the road. I'm hoping that the center pin system will get cheaper when we scale up to more massive volume and when more guys start shooting it.
Yeah.
Start running higher production, bring that cost down for more people. Because right now it's just the sleeves are $40 a 6-pack, or not 40, $20, $40 a dozen for just the sleeves.
Yeah.
So for the aluminum sleeves, the stainless steel ones are $50. So, but and I think down the road, and hopefully in the near future, we can scale it up, get some other companies licensing the center pin system. So I know a lot of guys want to see some of these broadheads with a center pin. I know a lot of guys want turkey heads because they don't want to. Nobody wants to be shooting $40 broadheads at a turkey.
Right.
And we do have a turkey head coming out.
Oh, cool.
With that, so in 180 and 200 grains.
Cool.
With the center pin system, so so guys should like that probably next year.
Next year.
Yeah. So
Cool.
we're trying to get it out this year, but we're going through a third party, and all of our stuff's made in America, except for the shafts. And all of our parts are made here with American steel and American titanium and aluminum, but they're not. And anyway, there's issues.
Yeah.
With those, but
well, I appreciate you really breaking down and going into your system and answering some of my kind of nerdy FOC questions and stuff like that.
Well, one thing that we can clear, hopefully the word will get out more, because everyone when they're thinking, like you said in the beginning, the FOC thing was going to be a 600 grain arrow lob and logs, and that's out there.
Yeah.
If guys want to do that and shoot elephants and hippos and stuff, there's definitely companies that build stuff for that. We build moderate weight arrows, FMJs with a 100 grain head, that weight range right in there, an Axis arrow with a 125, or a lot of guys are shooting Axis with a brass insert and a 125 or 100 grain head.
Yeah.
Then 450 to 500 grains, that's what we do. But we maximize the weight forward, and you're only about 19-20%. It's not that big a whip, but they fly better, flatter, and have they're just more forgiving overall and fly truer in the wind.
Yeah. Well, when you were watching me shoot out there, I knew it, and I said, I'm like, God dang it! And then you're like, yeah, you torqued that one a little bit,
just a teeny bit.
But it was still in a toucan sized dot. Yeah. I think it was in the left side of it.
Yeah.
But that arrow steered really well, and it just flew. And so I can see the difference in it. I really can.
Well, one of the benefits we didn't get to try here because we can't shoot broadheads.
Yeah.
But when you're shooting a fixed blade broadhead with the weight forward system, even when you torque in that bow a little bit. If you're shooting the 100 grain head, that's why the 100 grain heads and stuff are so tiny too, because that arrow's pushing. If they start pushing in a different direction from bow torque, that arrow's now going that direction. If it moves off center a little bit, now it's going in a whole different travel vector. When you're running the weight forward system, but that 19-20% plus, if you push that head directly at that target, even though you torque that bow, that head's going to keep on track towards that target. And in fact, we did this with. Well, Scott Carr, I think I told you about that at my house. We're shooting at 70 yards. He torqued the bow twice, 3 shots with a broadhead. One was 2 inches to the left but he torqued it. Because I'm standing right behind him. I'm watching I can see the bow jiggle.
Mm-hmm.
Shot one over 4 inches right. Elevation was perfect. We were at 80 yards. And last one, as soon as he let go, his bow he had dead bow. It was perfect. I go, boom, perfect shot. Gets in there, and I swear, I'm not kidding you, he hit the center of the 2x2 piece of tape we were shooting at. But then he's like, well, I thought I got off those clean. I go, no, you torqued a little bit. But I go, check this out. You torqued the bow 2 times. One barely, the other one pretty substantial. He was still in like a 6-inch radius. At 80 yards with a fixed
really
blade.
Good. Yeah.
I said, and he's running 20% FOC, 200 grain heads, 250 spine. I said, if you're running low FOC, that group is probably about a foot. You're going from vitals to guts.
Yeah.
Just from a torque. Maybe not the first one, but the second one, for sure, you're gut shot him.
Yeah.
Or hitting him in the neck or whatever. So I was like, that's the difference.
I like to hear that.
Forgiveness. That's what we build into it. And it's not, we're not talking 30%. That's for the traditional recurve guys can get that, some of those guys. But for the normal compound guy, it's just taking your weight of your normal moderate weight arrow and just moving it forward to give you a more stable platform.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that. When you say building and forgiving, I try and when I'm talking hunting setups and stuff, I'm like, I want to make it as easy for me to make a mistake but still have a good shot or be as forgiving as possible, because things happen when you're out there. And I want to give myself the most range of error and still have a successful shot. And you're building your system around that. So it sounds like I needed to play around with your system a lot more. And why don't we give you or have you give the listeners some contact information or places they can go to check out your stuff?
Well, it's ValkyrieArchery.com, ValkyRie, ValkyrieArchery.com, or we're on Instagram at Valkyrie.archery. Yeah, we don't do a whole lot of Facebook, but we just run all our Instagram over to Facebook, so there's some stuff there.
Same here.
Yeah, so that's pretty much everything's online. We do test kits, so if guys want to just check it out, our arrows are, arrows aren't cheap. They're not super expensive, but they're not cheap. But they are accurate. They're not works of art, but they're very functional, accurate setups. We square everything. Everything comes out square and true. And but the test kits are awesome because for $50 you can get 2 separate arrows with 3 different head weights. And mix and match and just see what the weight forward thing's all about. Yeah. See what works best out of your bow before you go all in and spend a bunch of money on something. Because that was another one of my pet peeves I didn't like when I was testing everything was you always had to buy a dozen arrows or something. And then we do sell arrows by the 6-pack too, because you buy a dozen arrows and all this new fancy stuff with these outserts and you try them and it just didn't turn out like you thought. So but you're out a whole bunch. So
right.
Test kit allows you to, and I think a lot of other guys are doing that now too, but the test kit allows you to mix and match samples or, different head weights and stuff within a range of where you want to be and find the perfect setup so you know exactly what you get. When you order arrows based off the test kit, you can either modify a little bit or if you're shooting an arrow you like that's perfect for you, you will get that exact arrow. When everything's written on the arrow, so you'll know exactly what to order when it's order time. So
yeah, I'll probably be getting one of those test kits just to compare and see where they're outperforming my setup, because I'm always looking at I'm not partial to anything. I'm like you. I want the best performance I can get. So I'll go where the wind blows me pretty much as far as performance. So outside of that, Brent, I really appreciate you coming on the show, man. I know you've been super busy over there, so thanks for taking time away from your tent.
Appreciate it.
And we'll catch you on the next one.
All right, Garrett. Good talking with you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
All right, everybody. Hopefully you had a great time listening to this episode. Brent brings a lot to the table, a lot of information here, and I can attest to shooting his system. I was getting amazing arrow flight down the range, and it was better than my Axis arrows that I was shooting. And I test that just to having high-quality components. I have really heavy, high FOC probably, and just really appreciate everything that he showed me and talked about. So if you guys haven't yet, be sure to sign up for the newsletter. You can go to www.onpointpodcast.com. Sign up for that newsletter. You're not going to want to miss the giveaway that I have coming out for it. I am still putting it together. I'm not going to say anything about what's going to be in the giveaway, but it's going to be a good giveaway, and be sure to don't miss it. Just go up there. It takes 2 seconds. Give me your email, and you're done. So outside of that, appreciate everybody listening. The podcast is absolutely rolling right now, and that is thanks to you, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.